Good afternoon. Z.M. Wise is with us. He has composed a book of poetry called The Wandering Poet. I would like to spend a few moments in discussion with Mr. Wise, also known as Z.M. Wise. As I glanced through this book of poetry as the publisher, I couldn't help but notice there was most of the poems are around kind of like somewhat mythological and tribute themes rather than the usual social commentary or radical poetry that's out there in today's world. I just had a question. What made you take that approach of the myth rather than the social commentary?
Well, being that it's my early work, this and a few other books, more of my social commentary sort of poetry came after that. And in Take Me Back Kingswood Clock, my previous book, and this one, I decided to explore themes that I have been exploring since I was a child, and one of them being mythology. When I was about 4 or 5 years old, I read Edith Hamilton's mythology, understood it, absorbed it, and I was completely immersed in it. And I wanted to explore them by mostly writing about... I was mostly interested in the creatures rather than the gods. Although the gods had very interesting stories, I was more of an animal man, as you should put it. And so there are different creatures, and they're explored, such as Cerberus and Medusa, and writing my own interpretation of them sort of helped shape, my own perception of that certain myth.
I wrote a critique in the book, and I started with a sentence: Mr. Wise not only embraces life itself, but he asks the reader to stand up and be part of the active nature of existence. And you have a poem called The Timid One. I understand a lot of this has to do with a person's personality may be a little bit not as assertive as other people, and you're asking them, be yourself, be willing to speak up and be a person in the world and let people know who you are. Don't be afraid of that. And I say that this is such people seek their own paths and forget impressing others. Is this a common message in your work?
It can be. I use symbolism. Symbolism is one of my greatest allies in my work, so you can look at it as that, or you can take the direct approach. It's completely up to you, really, but that is a certain message that I try to implement in many of these pieces, for sure. Yeah.
And I think it's very valid in today's world, when we deal with a lot of the younger kids getting bullied and looked down upon, and when they're just trying to make their way just as anybody else. And I've recently read that disabled kids with physical abnormalities or mental illness have a chance of being bullied twice as much as other kids. And I understand you've also been a victim of this, as I have as well. And I wondered if those experiences translated into your work, especially since this is a younger edition of your work.
Yes, they have. Sometimes, maybe not written in the best way. I try not to remember my K through 12 years, to be completely honest with you. My life really picked up after high school, I would say. And in poems such as The Timid One, it's a reflection on those days, but also it could be me explaining to my future son, don't repeat what I went through. Don't let them see you sweat, as my father has told me. And it is quite possible. It really is. If you seem strong in here, and it's just like confidence. If you feel confident about yourself enough, people may catch on to that. And if you don't go around looking down at the ground, if you're not sulking, if you're not looking around paranoid like, there are some ways that you can voluntarily make yourself a target for bullying, and such as certain things that you wear, certain things you say even. And the best way to go about this is, just own yourself. If you try to fit in, that's one thing, but if you're going to try to be normal for other people, don't bother. What is normal anyway? Pretty much everyone I've known has called me weird or odd at some point, and you know what? I take it as a compliment, because I'd rather be that than normal, whatever that is. Weird, stay weird, that's what I say.
I'm looking at a poem called The Vineyards of Engyard. Is that about any particular place, or is that an imaginary place?
I'm so glad you asked about that, actually. That was sort of a precursor to an epic poem that I wrote 1 or 2 years later. I think you recall The Forest King?
Yes.
Yeah. That certain place, Engyard, there was a certain place in the mythical realm of the epic poem, The Forest King. And that one was more nature-loving. And I do try to explore nature, even if it seems like this world or this country, like some of it may be falling to ruins, or if people are, are corrupt or whatnot. I still try and see the sweetness in certain things, even if it is extremely hard to. You need to try.
When you write your poems, it sounds like you compose, interweave the myths that you create in each of your books. I wondered if there was a specific allegory you're trying to present in your full body of work.
Not really. When I'm writing, whether it's style, topic, theme, I like to keep it versatile and explore many themes. I never really stick to one pardon me, particular topic or whatnot. And unless a book of mine has a certain theme, which some of them do, then it, like The Wandering Poet, is mostly a collection, and once you start reading, your emotions, your thoughts will be thrown all over the place, like a cluttered closet, but once you open the door, the objects come flying out in many different directions, and after you're finished reading, you can carefully organize your thoughts and maybe stack them as high as you want.
I'm looking at another poem called The Fireman, the Hero, Fire in the Sky. Is this about a person you personally knew, or is this another mythological creation?
No, that was actually a tribute poem to a friend of mine. He's a volunteer firefighter, and this is about a person that he knew and that he was mourning like crazy. And I never knew the person, but I read on him. I read all about him, rather, and he was quite the mensch, as they say. He was a wonderful man, and it really prompted me to write something about him, and it needed to be seen. So that's about him.
And you draw from, I've noticed when you first were talking about the book, you talk about Greek mythology, and what brought you to Greek mythology in general? I mean, was there a person who gave you a present, or was it a suggestion by your parents, or?
Yeah, my father gave me this book, Edith Hamilton's Mythology, and it was pretty lengthy. I mean, at my early age, but I've always loved bigger and thicker books. I always loved that sort of information. And after reading about Greek mythology, as great as it is, I want to take a look at world mythology, whether it was African or Welsh or Chinese. I wanted to explore the myths all around the world, and I was very interested in the creation myths, you know, in the Abrahamic religions, you know, it started out, you know, with Adam and Eve, you know, and then the fall of man. But in Greek mythology, the world started in chaos. Literally, it was this blackened form called chaos. And in the Dogon tribe, it's this tribe that's located, I believe, in either Central or West Africa. Pardon my that incorrection, but they pretty much came from these beings in the sky, and there were these fish-like beings called the Nomo. They actually resided in water, but it wasn't exactly a mothership, but it was some sort of craft, and they had this actual bond with the star known as Sirius, and they were blessed with this technological advanced knowledge that would not be utilized until thousands of years later. And archaeologists went and discovered this, and of course they're not going to believe the creation myth, but they're going to wonder how on earth did they, you know, come to obtain this information. You know, it's quite mysterious, but I found it quite fascinating.
I'm looking at what I consider to be a standout poem of this collection, Little Men of Piragan. And this poem, I've been contemplating the idea that a lot of the heartache that poets experience, the heartbreak, is my friend Melissa Studdard posted recently that her heart breaks at every beautiful thing. And I feel that that's in part because beauty exists alongside some of the horrors and atrocities of life. And this poem seems to kind of reflect that. It says, I see all, I know when death laughs. I know his sense of humor causes genocide. And I wondered if that was an intentional reference, or if there was a specific, I mean, is this a specific, another myth, or is this another imaginary idea? I mean, because this is an interesting poem, kind of reflecting how death is actually, in a sense, you know, we don't understand why we die, but in a sense it's presenting that idea that beauty exists along horror when you say it's his sense of humor causes genocide. I wondered if that was intentional.
Well, let me ask you, when you read it, what do you see?
Well, that's what I see. I do see that, you know, it's a point of when, you know, saying death laughs. Death is just a segment of life. It's just something we experience. And in a sense, it's saying death is both horrible and it's merely a part of life that we have to learn to cope with. And poets, one thing they're known really especially for is, you know, accepting life and knowing what life is, but still struggling with it, still trying to understand it. And I see that in this poem. And you know, and it says at the very end, you go through what the Little Men of Piragan has heard and seen, and what knows death does this and that, and he says, I know all. So maybe it's a reflection of the poet's conscience. Well, I just wondered if the Little Men of Piragan was a specific, something out of fiction or an old fairy tale or something like that.
No, I mean, what you see, that's what it's going to be, and I'll remind you, if there's a piece you do not directly understand, you'll ask me what it means. I'm just going to ask you, make your own meaning. That's what it's going to be. I have my own meaning, but yours could be much more significant than my own, you know, and I leave that to you, the dear reader.
Right. You know, that's generally how a person, you know, interpreting poems. A lot of people in creative writing classes don't understand that, but if you have a very good teacher, you will eventually grasp all the subjective idea and stop trying to go into literary criticism. All you're going to get from that is a reflection and some thought-provoking material to assist you in looking for other. It might give you a piece of information you didn't know and let you come to other conclusions about the work. I mean, it's kind of like chiseling away at a stone, and you're making a better sculpture out of that. But you know, this is a very imaginative work, especially for a younger poet, and I think you've got a lot of really good material in here. And personally, I'm impressed with the fact that it stands away from a lot of the already accepted notions of poetry, and then also embraces a child view of life. It really takes an entire approach that's completely unique in and of itself, and it really has the poet's mind in it, and your style is matter of fact, combined with myth, and I'm just curious how you developed that. I mean, do you spend a lot of time writing, or how does your creative process go?
Well, here's the thing. As far as that's concerned, there was a time in the months of 2010 where, before I started working out again, I would take long walks and I would take my voice recorder with me and just walk around. I wouldn't force inspiration. I would, just walk and just see what happens. And if I have an idea, I would turn my voice recorder on and say, poem idea, and then the title, and unless it's untitled, or I would put the words that I thought belonged in it, and then that's how I went about that for a while. And I still have about I think like well over 400 little sound bites that are essentially poem ideas that I haven't written yet that will be written. And other than that, I always carry my notebook with me, my current notebook, with the poems that I'm writing, and I do spend a lot of time writing, but the thing is, you cannot be a writer without reading. I'm terribly sorry if you think otherwise, and if you're influenced by other media, that's great, but the truth of the matter is you have to read, or else. I totally agree. Or else the writing will come out as completely bland. I spoke to a poet that said he wasn't influenced by anything, and I asked him, really, that's quite interesting. Do you read it all? He's like, well, why would I need to read? I can just write. And I'm like, well.
Talk about a dullard.
Yeah, and so I asked to see a sample of his work, and you cannot hide arrogance. You really can't. And the work that he showed me, I'm sorry, I never give harsh criticism in my life. I'm constructive about it, and I've never. Let's just say I've never seen anything like it, and I never want to see that again.
Right. I've met poets that they're not poets. They're people that put pen to paper, but they don't know it's a work and a suffering that goes into it's a humility that goes into it, and you could look in my collection of books. I've read probably half of these. Mm-hmm. I haven't read them all, and I haven't read all of them. But you don't have to read everything you buy.
Right.
But you do have to spend an amount of time in studying. When you're not writing, you have to be reading. But to conclude the interview, I'd like to ask, we had Cheyenne Hensley design the cover, and she did this from an original design which you actually personally conceived. It's a picture of a man. This is kind of a sketch, and he's walking out of the darkness into a white field. I wondered, and he doesn't have a hand. That's kind of an interesting. I wondered if there was an intention behind this as well. I kind of have an idea of, it's a sense of becoming one and becoming whole. And but do you have this as a theme? Are you saying, walking into the light, or because he's coming out of the darkness, he's emerging into to what could be conceived as any number of types of things that white could represent. Did you have anything particular in mind with this design?
This is a choice, really. This is a choice in life. You can be emerging from the darkness, walking into the light, but sometimes the light isn't always a good thing. Sometimes my interpretation of both light and darkness, sometimes light is necessary, sometimes darkness is necessary. I see darkness really as imminent peace, tranquility, reflection, and Cheyenne did incredible amazing job on this, and